everybody. My name is Aaron Rosenblum. I'm the Health and Science Librarian here at the Portland Public Library, and so happy to welcome you here and host you here. Or if you're watching this later on the internet, just happy to be streaming right to you. Tonight's event is part of our sustainability series, which PPL co-hosts with the Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative, and we have the collaborative's executive director, Jess Burton, right here, my partner in bringing this to you. So thanks, Jess. Yeah, and this is the last of our season. We usually run something like September through May, but we will be back in September, I assume. Shall we? Okay, great. Okay, we'll be back in September with more of this series. Certainly PPL and SMCC will both have great programming throughout the summer. Otherwise, check our websites. So what we'll do tonight is we will have our panel discussion, and then we'll take Q&A from you all. And when we do the Q&A, I'll maybe run out to you with the mic at the very least. That way our recording system will hear what you say, which would be great. And for you all, share those mics as you see fit. Thank you. Before we go any further than that, I just want to quickly pause to offer Portland Public Library's land acknowledgement, which is as follows. Portland Public Library would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the occupied and unceded territory of the Wabanaki, the people of the place where the sun first looks our way, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We extend our respect and gratitude to the many indigenous people and their ancestors, whose rich histories and vibrant communities include the Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations, and all the native communities who have lived in Chuabunkeg for over 3,000 generations in what we now also call New England and the Canadian Maritimes. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So, just a couple more notes before we start the conversation. There are restrooms right out here, and if they were locked when you first arrived, they're open now, and they'll remain open throughout the program. There's a water fountain out there. Please note that when this program ends, the library will be closed. So leave when we're done, please. Love to have you come back to the library anytime that is not for long after we're done tonight. And you'll go out the way you came in. If you came in through our main entrance on Congress Street, you'll just head back out that way, and we'll appreciate that, and we'll see you back here when we're actually open again. But with all that said, I want to get right to it. And in order to prevent me from going on and on about all of you instead of you doing that yourselves, I would love it if you would each just introduce yourself with maybe your name and your organization and your title or what the organization does. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Paul Drinan. I'm on the board of the Mountain Division Alliance, and we are advocating for a rail trail from Portland to Freiburg. 2 sections of the trail are currently built, about 5 miles in the Gorham area and another 5 miles in Freiburg. And we hope that the next section to get built will link those 2 sections from Standish to Freiburg.
Good evening, I'm Jamie Parker with Portland Trails, and we're a regional land trust operating primarily in Portland, South Portland, Falmouth, and Westbrook. And we have a 80-ish mile trail network throughout that area, and we focus both on recreational trails and transportational trails, and are, I think, collaborating with all of these other fine folks and organizations. So thanks for having us.
Good evening. My name is Billy Chaya. I'm the president of the Greater Portland chapter of the New England Mountain Bike Association, or GP NEMBA, as a lot of people will refer to it as. NEMBA as a whole, we have 33 chapters in New England. consisting of roughly 10,000 members. And of Maine, there are 8 NEMBA chapters in Maine. We are a group promoting mountain biking in the New England area. We do group rides. We work with different land trusts and land managers to promote an advocacy of trails. We work to promote the good stewardship of trails and with other trail users. And we just are really excited that Greater Portland has a great mountain biking scene, and we hope to grow more.
Hi, I'm Toby Jacobs. I'm the program manager with the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust. We're a small community nonprofit of 3 staff, and we're headquartered in Westbrook, and our region includes 5 of the towns of the lower Presumpscot watershed: Gorham, Gray, Standish, Westbrook, and Windham. And within those towns, we have 46 preserves at last count, 18 of which are public access. So conservation and trails and recreation are really key to our mission. So we have over 2,000 acres of conservation land and about 27 miles of trail. And trails are a big part of what we do, but we also organize a volunteer water quality program throughout the region, and we coordinate the 28-mile Sebago to the Sea Trail that goes from Portland all the way to Sebago Lake. And excited to be representing the Land Trust here.
Great, thank you. I think the first question is kind of for all of you, and you all just introduced organizations that approach trails differently or have kind of different interests in trails even existing. So I was just kind of wondering if any of you who choose want to jump in to sort of talk about how these trail networks come into existence between your organizations. Paul, I think you've got you're in the thick of trying to make something happen, so I think you could speak to sort of how you're working. But yeah, I mean, GP NEMBA is doing something different because GP NEMBA doesn't own any of the lands, and whereas PRLT does, and Portland Trails is kind of all over the place. So where do trails come from?
I'm going to say that they have always been here as long as there's been people walking the land, right? So of our network of trails, almost all of them were sort of there in some form before we came on, and reached an agreement with a landowner and began to improve them. So I think, they're as old as walking, right? That's how we got around, was on trails before we had other means. So, but more to your, current point of our network in particular is very broad, as you said, as far as we do own land. We are a land trust, and we have hundreds of relationships with landowners. Some of those are municipalities, some of those are private landowners, some of those are other land trusts and other nonprofits. So it's, ours is a sort of a grid or a web that connects many of those different types of land ownership and access. And then I find it tends to be a very iterative process in the creation of trails. There's an existing trail, there's an idea, there's an agreement, there's an effort on the ground to improve it, and then that builds over time to potentially a much grander network that has more resources, more investment, until it's where we're at now, which is a whole range of trails that all these folks manage. So that's my thought.
And on our end, from the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, I would say it mostly starts with the land. We do own the land that most of our trails are on, and we're always assessing trails and recreation as pieces of a project. I know we'll talk about that more later, but the land project happens first, and then we assess whether trails can be part of it, whether they're the major part of it, whether they're the highlight, and then how to balance who will be using the trails and all the other potential uses of that land.
Take it off. We are a little newer than walking. Mountain biking itself has probably been around, if you go to history books, from the 80s. The NEMBA was founded 36 years ago, so very early in the mountain biking days, because it was realized that a group has to exist to help promote mountain biking on trails that people aren't used to having a bike out there. So to be good stewards of the land, to respect other trail users, walkers, horseback riders, etc., and to really show that we as mountain bikers can be respectful, good trail users, so that we can maintain the access that we have and then gain new access with new organizations that maybe aren't used to the thought of a bike being out there. But once you have a discussion with them, talk to them, show them trail systems that exist and how mountain bikes can coexist very peacefully with other trail users, great things can happen from that. And so again, like, we don't own any land. We are just promoting the good stewardship of the land to our members and to just like the general public. We promote a organization called Ride with Gratitude. They're by the Bike Borderlands, so it's essentially saying that we have to be respectful of the land that we're on, we have to care for the land that we're on, because it's a gift that we have that we're using it. So it's really critical to maintain relationships with these land managers, private landowners, so that trails can continue to be built and then be built sustainably.
Yeah, I'm hearing similarities and differences. Mountain Division is an advocacy group, so we do not and will not ever own land. But I think the difference for us is that our project is a publicly owned asset, so it's owned by the state of Maine, the majority of the Mountain Division corridor. The section from Portland to Westbrook, about 6 miles, is currently privately owned. Used to be owned by Pan Am Railways, and last year it was conveyed it's always a complex process through the federal government, but CSX, one of the major rail carriers in the United States, acquired that property, as they did all of Pan Am's assets in New England. So luckily, Maine DOT wrote into that sale agreement that they have first refusal. So hopefully sometime in the next few years, they run about 1 load of coal a month, that's my understanding, from the Portland waterfront into a depot in Westbrook. And so we hope that sometime in the near future, in the next 2 or 3 years, they'll shed that asset, and then the state of Maine will own it, and then it will be one publicly owned corridor, all the way from Casco Bay to Freiburg. And if you're familiar with the rail trail movement around the country, it's going to be an incredible asset for the state of Maine. Connectivity between neighborhoods, schools, ATV trails, definitely mountain bike trails and other land trusts. So we don't own property, but the complexity for us lies in, like Jamie or all of you, the numerous relationships that must be maintained. There are 9 communities from there, Portland all the way to Freiburg. And so we have buy-in from all of those communities, but as those elected officials and employees turn over, sometimes you have to start over again and build those new relationships. So I guess that sums up that bit for now.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I got one little asterisk to put on. NEMBA does own one chunk of property down in Milford, Massachusetts. It was bought probably 20 years ago. There was a conflict of the area, and they were going to lose access to a whole big trail system, and NEMBA actually did fundraise to buy I would probably put it around 50-acre parcel.
Where is Milford?
So east of Worcester, north of Rhode Island area, kind of like that corner area. So
Okay, so trails come from everywhere, walking, and then they come from all, all different sources. Um, Toby, I'd actually like to kind of follow up on a part of what you said, which is that for Presumpscot, and I think this is true of land trusts in general. I mean, it starts with the lands, it starts with conservation, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like land trusts in general, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, were really, it was really about the land to the point where, I should preface this by saying I've lived in other places with land trusts, and I'm a relatively recent arrival in Maine. Other places I've lived and or 20 years ago in Maine, I feel like land trusts often were kind of not, it's not like the sign said keep out or no trespassing, but it was like we've conserved this land, including from you. And I feel like the magic that happens around here, or maybe it's a shift in land trusts in general, is maybe an understanding that welcoming people onto the land, first of all, is friendly and nice and enjoyable for us people, but also is beneficial. I assume it's also beneficial to the land trust. I sure didn't give any money to any local land trusts until they said, here are some nice trails for you to use. I had no reason to, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, is that a trend with land trusts? Is it just that Maine's land trusts are so much better than everywhere else? What's going on there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we are typical of other land trusts in that we have a lot of criteria we look for in terms of what makes land valuable. And there's conservation values and the recreation values and clean water and other things like that. But the ability to get people out onto the land is huge. It creates a different kind of relationship between the community and the land that's very different from if the land is conserved with a glass case over it and people are just told or shown pictures that represent its value. Some people just want to be out recreating for the exercise, but a lot of people really want to experience nature that's in their community in that way. So that's a big part of what we try to do for sure. And I think that is more recent, that more holistic approach, as my understanding across the land trust world.
Yeah, I mean, we could come back to this, but it's worth mentioning that the other two places I'm thinking of that I've lived were also areas that had a lot more horse culture than in Maine, and a lot of the culture around the land conservation was coming from the horse industry and sector, and I don't want to judge really based on that, but it's something that I see. It's a difference. I don't know if it's. We'll come back to trail conflicts later, but maybe that was part of why usage was a little more controlled by certain groups. I don't know. Now the horse industry is going to be after me. I've said too much. Kind of on a related note, and for sort of all of you, having people on the land also has impacts, of course. And I was wondering about sort of that balance, sort of for sustainability I'm a mountain biker, I'm a hiker, I'm all these things, and I value those uses. I can also see where maybe, there's certainly some popular parks around here, but if you're Acadia, right? Acadia has had to take steps, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, to basically say, wow, have we reached the limit of the number of people that we can have on these trails before it's actually causing more harm than the good we're trying to do? Do you see that conflict around here? Is it something we should be worried about? And or if it is, what are you all doing about it? What can we do about it?
I'd say it's a good problem to have. Most of us don't have operation or client bases like Acadia. So it's a good problem to have until it's not. And Acadia is certainly an opportunity for us all to learn how to manage crowds and other places that saw that kind of traffic prior to Acadia. They have systems in place like lottery systems or whatever, but from the mountain division perspective, we're decades away from worrying about too much traffic.
I'd say we're there in some cases, and in Portland with the Portland Trail system. Again, it's a good problem to have. Obviously, it's a very popular network in the most populous area of the state of Maine, and so as a result of that, we are feeling a little bit of that friction of certain areas that are very popular getting a little bit of, I don't want to say overuse, because sometimes it's about the management of the use or trail construction and methods and communications are all factors in how we welcome people onto the land, at the same time, working to mitigate human impacts, and that sort of, essentially it's about sharing the resource, sharing the trails, and in a densely populated urban area, we're extremely lucky to have a trail network, and we also recognize that we simply need to share it. There are areas of the state and the region that there's less pressure on the trails, and so those are areas where people can go and experience, a different type of trail use. But in the urban or suburban environment that we have here in the greater Portland area, there's inherently, multiple user groups out there on the trails, and we all just have to work together. And I think that's just a big part of what we all want to do, is encourage that use and have expectations and communicate that it's a community resource that we all have to share and work together to do that. So I will say, literally just today I was answering an email about some friction between user groups on the Presumpscot River Preserve, which is one of our most popular networks. And whether it's dog users, walkers, commuting cyclists, mountain bikers, these are all slightly different groups that have slightly different needs for how they use the trails. But ultimately, they're all welcome, and we just want to work together to try to, make it work in this context. So.
I got a couple things. So first off, as a mountain biking organization, obviously we're promoting mountain biking, but we do realize that not every chunk of woods is ideal for mountain biking. There are completely areas that are better for walking, better for and for preserving. We definitely do realize that, even though we love mountain biking trails everywhere, we are very fortunate with the density that we have, and it is growing. And then it comes down to building sustainable trails is a big thing. I would say there's probably a few of you would agree, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of these trails are literally you just cut a little bit of brush and rake a little thing, and then that would be the trail. And then as more and more walkers, bikers, et cetera, use it, it's not sustainable. So there's a lot of time and effort, and you guys would agree, money that goes into building sustainable trails. It takes a lot to have experts that know how to do proper drainage and how to build trail that if it rains yesterday, you can go ride it in the afternoon if it's sunny. But there's a lot of trail systems that require to be shut down for a while. So we do promote working with a lot of land trusts and different organizations to promote closing trails during our infamous Maine mud season. And no matter how much we would love to go riding when the first 60-degree day hits and the snow is gone, we realize that if you go out there and ride for those couple weeks, you're going to completely destroy the trails and make a lot more effort for the trail builders. And I'm a trail builder as well. So it's a lot of it's promoting the knowledge to our user base that, okay, maybe you should stay off trails for a little while, or working for these closures, and then also promoting different areas to ride. So if a certain trail is getting just a ton of traffic, and we hear from a land manager, can you maybe spread them to another section? So maybe we'll go and we'll lead a group ride at another trailhead, and then people will be like, oh, we never knew this trailhead existed, and all these new trails. And we have a lot of miles of trail to work with and a lot of variety of terrain, and it's great that we can spread out the user group throughout all these different areas instead of all in one spot.
So I'll preface this by saying at Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, we do spend a lot of time and resources between staff and volunteers and contractors on trail maintenance related to long-term use of the trails. But I would say overall, we are kind of a contrast to Portland trails in that we haven't seen a lot of issues from overuse, with the exception time-wise of the beginning of the pandemic. I think every land trust and every public access organization saw that. We had parking lots full, dozens of cars lined up outside of the parking lot along the side of roads where we just weren't used to seeing that. And the other exception being during the Alewife run, it's very popular at a Millbrook Preserve in Westbrook, which should be starting any day now. So we see a lot of users around that. But besides that, in terms of our region, it's much more suburban and rural than Portland trails. And we don't see full parking lots, we don't see overuse. And so I feel like in our case, we're often trying to promote the trails to actually get more use. That said, I think that it's changing as most of our trails are in Gorham, Westbrook, and Windham, and those are three of, if not the three, fastest growing towns in terms of population in the state. As the population of Portland, or people who want to be close to Portland, that's expanding the population, those towns are developing, so I expect that we'll be having a lot of those challenges coming our way soon. So I'll probably be giving you a call to talk about how you deal with it.
I will say personally, I practice self-policing, so if I see an area that's noticeably experiencing an uptick with traffic, I'll go somewhere else. I also have the luxury of being a sole employee or self-employed person, and so I have the luxury of going. I don't have to go before work or after work. I can skip out at 2 and get in a ride and then go back and work a little extra. But that's what works for me. But I know that not everyone has that luxury.
Yeah, it sounds very nice. I'll talk to my boss about rearranging my schedule here for the benefit of the trails.
Healthy employees means a healthy company.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'd actually like to, as a mountain biker, one mountain biker to another, or several others, I don't want to get totally bogged down on that, but Billy, it's great to hear you say that your view, or NEMBA's view even, is that not every piece of land, must have mountain bike trails on it. And yeah, I feel like if you hang around on the main sort of mountain biking internet, you can get a sense that there are people who sort of do think that every single piece of land should have mountain bike trails on it. And I'm sure the same would be true if I was on other kinds of users' social media. And I was wondering about your thoughts, or really any of your thoughts, about some of those things, like the trail closures. So yes, let's keep the trails closed when it's muddy. It's going to harm the trail. Some of the mountain bike community is organized, like people who are members of NEMDA, or look at the GP NEMBA Facebook page, or the 207 MTB Facebook page. Very popular, thousands of people on it. But some parts of the community are kind of, I think, unorganized. And I was kind of wondering about those challenges, and maybe for the land trust too, of sort of, you can put the word out, but does it reach everyone? Which for me becomes the question of, are the people who are out there when it's unhealthy for the trails out there because they don't know, or because they're jerks? No, I'm not asking you to call any of your trail users jerks. But yeah, it's a challenge I see, because people will ask, maybe in the 207 MTB Facebook group or whatever, are these trails open? And like the post before was like, these trails are closed. So yeah, it's hard to get information to people. How do you go about doing that? Do you feel you're being successful with that, or yeah, I don't know. How are we going to get there?
In terms of Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, I know unlike some other land trusts, we actually don't do seasonal or weather closures except in extreme cases, or any temporary closures really. So in an ideal world, everything would be designed so that it's sustainable, and even if it's rough in one season, it'll sort of take care of itself, or with regular maintenance. In reality, a lot of the trails were older, and so have seen more use or weren't necessarily designed with that in mind. So it just presents a big maintenance challenge, and we're just prepared to spend the time and resources on those. But that's kind of a decision we've made as an organization, not to make trails off limit for any time, even in the spring, for better or for worse in some cases.
As a mountain biker, I just use common sense. If it's rained, then I know what areas hold water and I just avoid them. And when in doubt, I'll get on an app or number website and check trail conditions or file a trail report if I know an area is wet. From the mountain division, our big issue has been ATVs, and I'm not knocking ATVs, but pardon me while I knock ATVs. No, they just historically ATV users have not been good partners for us on the mountain division. I can't speak for other trail folks, but we've had ongoing issues, and I will say that the snowmobile folks, there's sometimes tensions between motorized and non-motorized users, but the snowmobile folks have been very, very solid partners, and they're out there in the summertime building, maintaining, and we just don't see that from the ATV crowd. And not only do we not see that, we see just flagrant disregard for rules of the road on the trail when it comes to other users. And so it's been a conflict, a source of conflict for us, and trying to figure out how to navigate those waters is very challenging because it's state-owned property, and we're not the police.
And I think in some cases, ATVs and snowmobiles may have, if not the most up-to-date trail building techniques, they may have more skin in the game, right? We have snowmobile clubs in this state that I'm sure are as old as snowmobiles, and maybe some of the ATV groups as well may have been using the lands, authorized, unauthorized, state lands, private lands, in a more continuous way, maybe than, say, mountain bikers, only in as much as those things have been around longer than mountain bikes have, which I'm only saying I think must add to the feelings and the conversation of, I can imagine being one of those users and saying, well, look, I've been out here on an ATV since your sport was in diapers, maybe not since you were in diapers, but bicycles, we're not in these woods, right? So yeah, I can imagine that's very complicated, and we may circle back to that, I guess. But
Yeah, and during these times of trail closures, a lot of times what we'll do as an organization is we'll promote trail systems that drain really well. There's a lot of areas that have really good sand beds and they drain well and don't get used as much or have a lot of rock in them. And we'll push people away from the areas of these clay, slimy riverbeds that wouldn't even really be that fun to ride anyways. So a lot of times it's just educating a little bit. Once again, we're our chapter is a volunteer organization. We don't tell any land trusts they have to close or tell any trail systems, etc. But a lot of times they will come to us asking, do you think the trails are good, or can you help promote a trail closure? And usually it's only the springtime. This spring we had that weird 6 inches of rain in a week, and it did really require the closing down. The trees weren't quite sucking up the water like they needed to. But a lot of times it's just education, and the amount of trail users and especially mountain biking since the pandemic has skyrocketed, and a lot of times it's just getting out that education. So it's spreading the word, getting to bike shops, trying to promote them to, if people have questions, come to us as a resource. We're just trying to help maintain the future of these trails.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say we don't close our trails because simply, primarily from a practical standpoint, it would be extremely difficult to enforce that. We are not the police, as Paul said, and we are not. It's because of the population density, it would be really hard to get the word out to everybody, and then enforcement. So, but I think just, climate change is bringing like mud season kind of year round. It's like permanent spring in a way, or 3/4 of the year. It's like it could rain, it could snow, it could be icy, and then it could dry up. So, our focus has just been on building resilient trails, as Toby sort of talked about. We're not 100% there yet, but we want, the goal is to build trails that can be ridden or walked or used, and not be causing, erosion and or just undesirable trail conditions. And that's just resources, hardening the trails, and designing them and using, best practices so that they do drain well, and those types of things. So it's an ongoing challenge, but I think, particularly in our realm, it's important to just recognize that these trails are going to be used all year round, and they absolutely are used, every single day, all times of the day, all times of the year. So,
Well, I'm a very daily Portland Trails trail user. I live in Riverton, and I work here downtown, and my commute absolutely depends, or my safe and enjoyable commute, I should say, depends on Portland Trails. I started out commuting right down Forest Avenue, totally straight shot. I live a couple hundred feet off of Forest Avenue, and it's just, that was quite miserable, especially in winter, crossing the tracks in Morrill's Corner, and there's 5 different streets coming in. So part of that is me just cheerleading for Portland Trails, but part of it is a segue to transportation as a topic. So one great fringe benefit of having, well-draining, hardened trails, so they work all the time, is so people can have this other kind of use. So I love and I want lots of fun, technical, crazy mountain bike trails, but I need the Portland trails to work well for me every day. So yeah, I just thought we could talk a little bit about these kinds of trails and these corridors and networks as a real, transportation alternative for folks. To whatever extent, if you don't really feel that touches on you, that's fine. But I feel like the Mountain Division trail, the Eastern Trail, people definitely commute on, and Mountain Division, it seems like there's a lot of potential there. Portland trails, I know I'm not the only person using them, so what do you all think are the kind of the prospects, advantages, challenges? I don't know, I guess again, you could have too many people commuting on your trails, but let's, like you said, Paul, let's find that problem and be happy to have it.
Yeah, transportation in general is definitely a passion of mine and a main focus of Portland Trail's mission. And we see the trail network as an extension of the transportation network, an extension of the roads, sidewalks, crosswalks, because as you've described, people use them to get around, and sometimes you're on the street and then you use a trail section and then you're back in the street and then you use a sidewalk and then you're stitching it all together, and that's how our network is most functional. The more we can stitch together, the more functional it becomes. And people do use, even the rugged trails sometimes as part of their commute. If you just have to use, if you have a gravel bike or some type of, or if you're walking, you can use a rough trail and then step onto a sidewalk. And then, so I think, they all work really well together, and that's the best case scenario, is we have this great network that provides a lot of function for a lot of different people. And I think that sort of gets to an issue we haven't really touched on, which is, equity and inclusion, because the ability to walk and connect with transit, which we haven't talked about as well, but I think these are the way we see our system is very much integrated with transit and transportation of all kinds for all people, and providing transportation choice is supremely important to us and to sustainable cities and towns. And from creating a vibrant and beautiful and functional trail network to creating safer streets and roads that don't kill us, which is, if anybody that, sort of in the transportation world knows that there's the rates of, pedestrian fatalities and bicycle fatalities are growing because we've unfortunately built, many of our roads, particularly outside of the village centers, to be very most accommodating of cars and not so much of people. So I think all of us have a role to play in moving the needle in the other direction a little bit and working with towns and cities to not only expand our trail networks for all kinds of uses, but really work on our road and transportation networks. And some of the towns that we're working in, are further along on that spectrum, and some are still catching up a little bit. And so that is a big focus of us. So.
Do you find that seems like something to me that Portland Trails has been hip to for a long time? Do you find in your interaction with other entities, and kind of same to you, Paul, that those cities or those other entities are hearing that a little more, or hearing that a little more easily now? Like they didn't get before that this might be part of transportation, and they just thought you wanted a nice place for grandma to take a walk, but now they get it.
Jamie's handing me the microphone because he's privy to my situation in Westbrook. I'll back up for a moment and say that what makes the Mountain Division unique and special is, as a rail trail, it will be a premier transportation corridor. So think about where a train travels. Typically straight as an arrow, flat. And the infrastructure for a great hard-packed trail with drainage is already there. Crushed stone, compacted, that's had locomotives running over it for decades. It's perfect. Depending on who you ask, some people will say that should be paved for mobility purposes, and others will tell you that it should be hard-packed like a stone dust. Still usable by all mobility forms, but easier, less to build, less money to build, and easier to maintain. The challenge that we're facing is with policy, mostly elected officials, policies turning around, but the notion that trails are strictly a recreational amenity, when we all know that there are legitimate forms of transportation that go between towns, between neighborhoods. Quite often there's a little trail from a street neighborhood or to a school. And so it's interesting that we're here tonight because GPCOG, does everyone know what GPCOG is? Show of hands. Greater Portland Council of Governments. So they get money from the feds and municipalities from Raymond to south of Biddeford, all the way out to like Raymond and beyond. I mean, well, how far west do they go? They go pretty far west, not to the border, but so they take money in from the feds and the municipalities, and then they dole out projects for transportation. And traditionally, that money has gone to cars, right, roads, some train stuff like the Downeaster. But now they're realizing that active transportation, which is defined as human-powered, is worthy of investment. And so the GPCOG just released today their Vision Zero plan. And Vision Zero is a way of reducing traffic injuries and fatalities. That number keeps going up, and the whole premise with Vision Zero is to get the number down to zero. The only way to do that is through infrastructure. And on the last page of the GPCOG Vision Zero study, they showed all the municipalities that have signed on to this and already begun the work. And every community in the Portland area was on that list, except my community, Westbrook. And the irony there is about 6 months ago, we started a task force, and we just had our first meeting with the city, and so we're massaging that relationship and trying to move the needle on the transportation, active transportation agenda. But I don't want to bog it down. I want to hear what these other guys have to say about their trail networks and how they relate to transportation.
Yeah, in terms of Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, it's definitely not the primary focus. We don't think of our trails typically in terms of transportation. It's mostly discrete, isolated preserves, again, land that we own or hold an easement on, and then the trails contained within that land. That said, we're always looking at ways to expand preserves and connect to access points and existing infrastructure in terms of transportation. So I think we have a voice in a lot of projects. Mountain Division, Sebago to the Sea Trail, the Gorham Crosstown Trail we're working with the town on, and we're excited to partner with Portland Trails, who've been trying for a few years on one particular project that hasn't quite come to fruition, but we have vision of a type of relationship where we hold land and essentially create access point that connects into their existing network that then connects to Westbrook and Gorham and everything else. So I think there's a lot of potential for that. And even though we have these specks of green throughout that 5-town region, we're always thinking about strategies to start connecting. And again, our area is becoming, if not more urban, certainly more suburban away from rural. And so town planners and other organizers are definitely having that conversation with us as well.
I guess I'm probably the least on the connection of the transportation. Probably a great number of our users do use the trails. Like, I use the Portland trails to get from my house in North Deering to downtown. And I use them all the time. And I'll ride them on the road bike occasionally, on the hard pack gravel ones. And it's so nice being able to connect these different trail systems. And then at a greater sense, like what you were talking about, Toby, is the interconnecting of all these different land trusts and the greater vision of things. I know there's an organization that just started recently, the Maine Trails Coalition. It's kind of about the long-term connectedness of all trails in Maine, kind of like a bigger picture vision. So I would definitely go check out the Maine Trails Coalition. I know NEMBA has signed on board to be in support of their mission. So that's like throughout the whole state. Because once again, if we can, what was that? And funding for trails. Thank you.
Sylvia with Maine Trails Coalition, by the way.
And this is Paul with Maine
Nice
Trails
to meet you.
Coalition also.
Yeah, so definitely the interconnecting of trails is great, because if I could mountain bike on, say, like Lowell Preserve all the way from my house in Portland to my work in Gorham, I would absolutely love it. So,
If you're curious about active transportation and how that relates to trails and connectivity, I highly recommend going to the Maine Trails Coalition website and seeing the proposed Maine State Active Transportation Plan. I will say many parts of that has been adopted by Maine DOT, and the estimated cost of that plan, which would connect 2/3 of Maine's population, is $160. Now, if we compare that,
160.
sorry, million,
I'll pay for it right
check
now.
right
yeah,
now.
I'll do it. I mean, what do you?
160 million. It's almost like 160. But when you compare that to the proposed Gorham connector, which started off with a price tag of 100 million 18 months ago. Now they're calling it 230 or 40 million, and we don't know when that project will get built, if it gets built, but by the time it gets built, it will certainly be at least 300 million. So when we compare 6 miles of pavement that's dedicated to cars to about a 50% investment to connect 2/3 of Maine's population through an active transportation network that pays dividends to the community, so something that's not extractive, it's a huge opportunity.
Great. There are a couple topics I do want to get to, but I also want to have time for questions. I just want to squeeze in, though, that I feel like what I want from active transportation and from transportation planning is that I want to choose the Portland trails because I get to birdwatch and stuff. I don't want to be avoiding Forest. I'd like to ride down Forest Avenue when I'm in a hurry and feel safe. That would be incredible. And then most days I would do the route I do now, which is crazy curlicue, because it's beautiful. It's amazing. I go through some woods. I'm along the back cove. And that's really what I feel like the push is for me. It's just that it would be choosing between those things, not being forced into one. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to be forced to ride on your Portland trails, but gee, it would be nice to take Forest when I'm late for a meeting and not feel like I'm going to die. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to, quality of life is a part of this discussion, right? I mean, we know that, access to nature is supremely, good for us in so many ways, right? Mental health, physical health, safety versus, potentially Forest Avenue. And until it gets better, it's not going to be the safest place. And it's not going to be someplace that somebody with a small child is going to be comfortable, or somebody that's just getting back on their bike, an older person that just bought an e-bike so that they could, get around. So we sort of have to do it all, I think. And to the funding point, I mean, it's so great that we're looking at, big federal, state funding, but I also think municipalities, really need to step up a little more. And, it kind of brings into question, is the land trust model the best way to be doing this? I mean, we're like so many, I think all of us are these scrappy nonprofits that are, hitting up donors and trying to just keep ourselves going. And, that's what we've been doing all this time. But, it seems like from a societal priority, we might reimagine that and invest a little or a lot more in these types of things. Again, not because they're going to put us on a best town, we don't need to be on another best town list, but because they are essential for the future of sustainable communities.
Yeah, and you've actually pointed a little bit in that comment and an earlier comment towards a topic I really think it's important that we get to, which is, you're talking about old people, young people, parents, different kinds of people. You mentioned equity and diversity, and I think we have an obligation as 5 apparently white guys sitting on this stage to talk about that. It's built into PPL's values. I don't know that it's explicitly built into your organization's values. I see that it's exhibited by your organizations, and I would love for some descriptions of your all's thoughts on equity and diversity and inclusion in your different parts of this conversation. So Portland Trails, you've hired someone to work specifically on this. It would be great for everyone to hear about that if they don't know. GP NEMBA has some rides that are women's rides in a predominantly male-dominated sport, and yeah, I think there's lots of work to be done like that. So if we could hear a little bit about that or other ideas on those issues, I think it behooves us, and it makes the trails better and our community better to confront that and take that on. So tell us about Angelique. Go ahead, keep talking.
I mean, I think we all probably realized that we're 5 white dudes up here, and the privilege that comes with that, as far as the ability to make some of these choices, which aren't as readily available for everybody, as far as how we're going to get around, and can we afford a sweet bike and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's inherent upon us all to be inclusive in the work that we do. I think nonprofits and all of us have that desire and want to see a representative, group of people using our systems, and that's so yeah. Portland Trails did hire an inclusion coordinator, Angelique Bitch-Lalua, and she has been working with communities that we haven't always as successfully been able to engage with. And we've been aware of that for some time, and we've made some efforts, and we were continuing on that, as I think so many of us obviously desire to, be inclusive. And again, for our system to be operating at its at its best example, it would be drawing people from all walks of life, all origins, and providing that choice. I think it's like there's a whole lot of people that can't drive or don't want to drive, or that can't afford a car, whatever it may be. But the more we can expand the network and get more people using all of these systems, then the better they are going to be, and the better healthier our community will be. So, sure. I mean, small efforts. I think we're sort of trying to be inclusive in the different ways, including having multi-language signs at our trailheads saying these trails are for everybody, because not everybody knows what a trail is, and they see not everybody's got a pair of hiking boots, and they see this wooden post, and it's like, well, what is that? But so being more intentionally, overtly welcoming, I think is one good step. But there's obviously a lot more that can go along with that.
First, I'll just say Portland Trails has done an incredible job in the past few years, and I think they're way out in front of at the forefront of the DEI work in the land trust community. And so we've been working on it internally in terms of board trainings, both talking about philosophical points and then how to apply those in terms of our work. And Portland Trails has been an inspiration and as well as a direct resource in some of that work. So that's really helped make it concrete. In terms of trails specifically, accessible trails is definitely a huge focus and a huge topic for us. And again, it would be great if all of our trails through history were built with accessibility in mind. And that was done in basically none of the cases, so we're mostly looking at future projects that are coming up, and we're trying to plan for the money and the resources and the expertise that it will take to make those truly accessible. And that comes in many forms in terms of communication with signage, the surface and width of the trail, to how people are actually getting to the trails. So it's a huge topic, and we're lucky to have a lot of other folks who are working on the same questions and issues to kind of lean on and work as a community to see how we can best do that.
Yeah, so it's definitely a topic that's been on the discussion board with our group for a while. We just had a leadership summit about a couple months ago with all the other NEMBA chapters, and there was a breakout of probably 6 different topics, and 3 of them were kids' rides, women's rides, and diversity and inclusion. So it was known that this is something that is happening. So we had our first women's social about a month ago. We had like 50 women show up and kind of just discuss mountain biking in a safe place that they could talk and decide how NEMBA could better help them. We also promote events, and we donate time and money to, say, the Portland Gear Hub, who is great with fixing up kids' bikes and like promoting biking in general. Like, they've been doing a tremendous job. That's something that their brick and mortar location, it's something that we don't have the resources or facilities, etc. So we try to support them in any way that we can, and we hope to continue the partnership with them. And then and promoting adaptive trails. We've started to do discussions of trying to map out what trails in the area would be suitable for adaptive, and then hopefully we can start a discussion soon to try to make a regional map on ones that are. So I think it'd be a great asset.
Around the world, people have been walking, and as long as there have been bikes, they've been biking all over the world. And the reason it's not more common here is we've been locked into this car culture mindset since the 40s or 50s, and it's dominated our culture. And so what we're starting to see now is a gradual shift away from that. And while the Mountain Division is newly reformed as a nonprofit, we're wrapping up a strategic plan. We're still forming committees and policy. So we don't have an official DEI statement or policy yet, but that's something that we know we need to do. I will say that when it comes to trails in general, a saying that I have been rolling out the last couple of legislative seasons for public comment is nothing is safer, nothing is cleaner, more affordable, more accessible, and therefore more equitable than a car-free trail for walking and biking. Period. Welcome to my TED Talk. Thank you.
Thanks. Great TED Talk. Yeah, so I do want to, I think we should actually shift to see if there are some questions. Since we've taken up quite a chunk of time, I could keep going. Boy, I could just go on and on about trails and asking you questions about them. But let's see if you all have questions, and I'm gonna come right to you if you do. There's one. I'm coming. Okay, for those watching at home, I haven't disappeared. I'm just moving towards the person in the audience. Here we go.
Hey, my name's Dustin. I've heard a little bit of talk about like elected officials. I'm just curious if either of you guys or any of you guys like talk about like local politicians that you endorse that are supporting the things you're doing.
Yeah, good question. I'm here tonight as a board member from the Mountain Division Alliance, and so as a nonprofit, we typically we have to be careful about advocacy, and when it comes to endorsements, I think we're actually not allowed to do that by law. But I can tell you that Senator Rick Bennett from Oxford has been very supportive of the Mountain Division project. And there are other Portland area House reps and senators that have also been very supportive of active transportation and trail work. And any one of these folks could tell you who's advancing their particular legislation.
Just on the Portland level, the Portland I think it's the Sustainability and Transportation Committee at the council level, has a very robust agenda for their work plan, and so I think that's worth paying attention to. I think there's a lot of potential there to advance stuff on the municipal level, at least in Portland with that committee. And there's some folks on that committee who are very transportation minded and sort of would be supportive of some of the efforts that we've been talking about tonight. So that's just one group that's I think worth paying attention to.
We're strictly a non-advocacy group, so we work with the managers and planners in all the towns and have productive relationships, but I think we'll have to plead the fifth on the rest of that. Other
questions? I have a sort of reframing of that one, which is where can individuals best point their own comments or feelings about trails within the local and regional sort of government? Is it, in Portland, is it that you need to tell the council, or do you need to tell the city manager? In the rest of the county, who should I tell that I, support any of your projects? That doesn't require you saying you like them or don't like them at all. I'll just ask all the questions from here on out.
So basically, you're asking how can you support these types of efforts?
How can I advocate for trails?
I mean, obviously, again, we're not advocacy as well because we're a nonprofit, but I would say that just that transportation planning and policy matters, and I include all of our work in that. I think that municipal, state, regional support for trails of all kinds is is becoming more acceptable and more recognized as something that's an asset for more than just a select group. So I think just paying attention to whatever level, I tend to focus, or we tend to focus on, the greater Portland region and work with GBCOG and those types of groups too, but, and then there's a lot of stuff at the state level that I'm not as aware of, but I know that there's some great work happening, so just.
I would just say I don't think there's a wrong answer to that. It's good for anybody at any level to hear about it, and I think town by town, community by community might make more of a difference for a council versus a staff person to hear about it, but I think whoever has the closest ear is a good person to talk to.
Yeah, I'll second that. I'll also say, not to get too into the weeds, but if you think of it as breaking it into chunks, so is it a municipal thing? So if you're thinking about a particular trail or an initiative, who's the controlling body of that initiative? Is it the city of Portland? Is it broader? Is it Cumberland County? Should you be talking to a state rep? Or is it a statewide thing? Should you be talking to someone in Augusta or someone like Maine Trails Coalition or Bicycle Coalition of Maine, someone who is a statewide advocate? And so if you're curious about advocacy in general, when it comes to active transportation, I think BCM, Bicycle Coalition of Maine, is a great resource. Also, Maine Trails Coalition.
Great. Other questions from way out there? Oh, sure, yeah. That's okay. You could just tell us about the Maine Trails Coalition if you want.
Well, my follow-up, I guess, to that question is to stay alert to LD 1156, the Maine Trails Bond, which is kind of a first step toward securing larger funding to support trails, not just development, but long-term maintenance in the state. It's $30 million bond, but if you look at other states like Indiana and North Carolina, we have a ways to go.
Thanks. Did you have one too? I'm coming.
So when I look for trails, I oftentimes go online, Trail Forks, Main Trail Finder, Google Maps, all of those places. And sometimes trail closures aren't posted there. Obviously, they don't talk about the use of the trail in terms of how many people are there. How do you interact with apps and other internet technologies in terms of helping people get the information they need and not end up on a muddy trail or other things like that? How are they tools for you, or how are they a challenge for what you do?
So, and I'll comment on the Trail Forks thing. And so NEMBA has partnered with Trail Forks to update maps, to keep things going. Once again, we are a volunteer organization, very small board member group. Would love more assistance and things like that. So it is difficult to do that. And also, we usually then follow the guidance of the actual land manager to then update. So there's usually a communication string that's difficult. But in terms of Trail Forks being really good, the more people who use it can log like, oh, there's a tree down here, and you can actually like post a pin or post a location. It assists us in either being able to then communicate to the land manager, or if it's something that our volunteers can do in terms of clearing damage, et cetera. Because once again, these trail systems are really big, and I know, Toby, you can't walk every trail that PRLT has. So to be able to update in ways like communication, like shoot a message to NEMBA on Facebook, and we will most likely know who the land manager is of that area and be able to communicate there. But yeah, we do hope to expand the Trail Forks mapping system in the area.
For us, the more permanent changes, we're pretty good about updating the maps, and we usually direct people directly to our website. For more temporary things, our social media is probably the best resource. In terms of those other third-party apps, I find that the more local they are, the more responsive and up-to-date they are. Main Trail Finder is just an email away to change a section of trail, whether temporarily or permanently, whereas All Trails is not. That's crowdsourced, and we've had a lot of issues with incorrect information being on there. And they're launching a beta program to have land trusts and other trail organizations be able to have more direct influence since they're the ones who own or manage those trails. So that's actually been a challenge.
The variation in trail naming between a crowdsourced resource like Trail Forks, where, you know, a trail that is officially called, you know, Blue Trail, but on Trail Forks is like, you know, Scotty's Wonderland Fun Zone, and you're like, okay, I'm looking for trail signs that say Scotty's Wonderland Fun Zone. I don't see any. I see these blue blazes, right? Like, yeah, that's part of my experience with user-created trail maps. Overall good, but some confusion with the naming. Yeah, any other questions? If not, I would like to give maybe each of you a chance to do a, you know, maybe let us know how we can support your organizations, or you know, any last thoughts you have. If there's something I didn't ask that you absolutely want to say, feel free. And then I'm going to thank all of you, but I'm not thanking you yet.
For Mountain Division, if you want to keep track of the project and receive an occasional newsletter, just go to mountaindivisionalliance.org, and there's a contact form there. Just sign that up, and we'll add you to our newsletter list. And there's also a Donate Now button, and that's, of course, the best way you can help us is to donate or to volunteer time. But please stay in touch with us. Thanks.
Yeah, so we had somebody that was very ahead of the game and secured the website trails.org. So we're pretty easy to find in that way, and we have the benefit of having a great communications staff, and so we are, you know, pretty responsive. And but yeah, we're a membership organization, and so we would love to have, you know, all of you as members, and but also just, you know, the more people communicate with us, the more we can sort of have that community dialogue, and you know, whether it's trail conditions or projects that we're working on, we can keep folks in the loop. So yeah, we would trails.org. There we are.
So we have a couple different Greater Portland NEMBA on Facebook and Instagram are kind of two things that we're updating. We're in the process of coming out with a new website, nemba.org, or subpage gpnemba.org. That'll be getting a revamp come the end of the year. And so right now, the quickest way probably to reach out to us is on one of those two social media platforms. Also, if you become a member, you get added to an email list, and we send out newsletters and updates through there. And once again, I'm going to promote to, like, not only becoming a member of NEMBA, but to become a donating member of these land trusts, because we work with these land trusts. If it wasn't for these land trusts and these trail organizations and land managers, we wouldn't have the trails that we're on. So, and like, again, like, it requires a lot of money to build trails these days. It used to be cheap. It used to just be rake a trail, and that was a trail. And now between bridging material, hardening material, time, there's a lot that goes into it. So we are fortunate, but it does require a lot to happen. And then getting, like we talked about earlier, towns and municipalities to recognize trails being an asset of the town, and to give money back to organizations to help maintain these trails.
We have a website, our initials, prlt.org. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, which has gotten more active since we've had a new communication and outreach staff person added, fortunately. The main way you can support all of our various programs is by becoming a member. Donation of any amount does that. And we're always looking for volunteers in any of our many program areas as well. And I'll just say in closing, I alluded to this earlier, but for those in the audience, not so much for those watching it after the fact, but one of the most exciting times of the year is right now, because the Alewife Run is about to start in Millbrook. So if anyone's not aware of that, you can go to our social media to learn more. It should be starting in the next few days probably, and you can go onto our trails on the Millbrook Preserve to actually see that in person. So hopefully you'll check it out.
I endorse that highly. I would note to all the mountain bikers out there that the Millbrook Preserve is not open to mountain biking, so you'll be walking to see the alewives, which is fine, because you're going to want to stop and watch them for longer than you'd want to be off your bike anyway. I'm right about that, right?
Biking is allowed, it's
Oh, it
just
is?
not wouldn't be very fun for a lot of the sections.
Sure,
But
okay.
you could try.
Oh, I thought it wasn't. Geez, this changes everything. Thank you all so much. Again, I feel like this conversation could have gone on way longer until everyone was asleep, except for us. Yeah, and thanks to all of you for coming, and thanks to the Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative for partnering with Portland Public Library on the sustainability series, which we just decided before. We'll be back with you in September. Yeah, and thanks, and everybody have a wonderful night.